Welcome to the Thyroidless Life podcast with me, Dr. Rebecca Warren. This podcast is for you if you're healing after thyroidectomy, or you've been diagnosed with a thyroid disorder, or think you might have a thyroid disorder and want to understand what it looks like to truly get yourself well. Quite frankly, I wanted to share all the information that I wish I knew a decade and a half ago when I was diagnosed with a thyroid issue, had my thyroid cut out, had high dose radiation, and left there feeling worse than before. And that's why I made this podcast, so I can share that information with you. So you can take that information, implement it, and truly get yourself well starting today. Welcome back, guys. Let's jump right in because I'm really excited for today's show because it's going to be a thyroid Q&A. I did a show answering thyroid questions a few episodes back, and it was super popular, and I had more questions. And so I decided, let's go ahead and jump right in. And it's going to be a special thyroid Q&A because I'm splitting it up between those that have a thyroid and those that do not have a thyroid. So this episode right here that you're listening to is for those that have a thyroid. And if you want to be able to submit questions for the next thyroid Q&A, also just be connected with what I am teaching, what I'm doing, what information is out there, studies, knowing when episodes go live, make sure to be connected in my newsletter. You can join by going to drrebeccawarren.com, Dr. Rebecca Warren, and you put in your email and you'll get my email sent straight to you. You're not going to get spammed because I hate getting spammed. You're only going to get emails that have information that is going to be applicable and helpful to you. Now, another episode is going live at the same time, and that one is going to be me answering questions from people that had their thyroid removed. And I got those questions from my free Facebook group, Healing After Thyroidectomy, and they submitted questions on there. And so if you're listening to this and you don't have a thyroid, that one might be a better Q&A for you. But let's go ahead and jump right in. Again, I mentioned most of these are going to be autoimmune related, but this first question's a little different. So if you forget to take your thyroid medication, do you take it once you realize you've forgotten or take a double dose the next day? So this is a really, really good question. And I'm going to be transparent with you guys here. I always share my own personal health journey, and I've been at this for 17 years. I lost my thyroid at a very, very, very young age. I was given thyroid medication to survive off of at a very young age without fully understanding the impact of it. The fact that now I'm having a pill take over a functional, really vital organ. And I'm going to be real with you that through those years, especially at the beginning, I was not very, very regular. And you don't want to do that. And you're probably like, well, duh. And I get it. But you wouldn't believe how many people I've spoken to through the years that either they're frustrated or they're busy. It's just something that they're not used to. There's different personality types where taking something over and over again at the same time every day is difficult. But, the one way I've started to look at it, the one way I've started to explain it, like if you are on thyroid medication, if your thyroid hormones are low and you have a thyroid, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on them forever, but it means that right now it's a necessity. This isn't just something to get rid of an issue. This is literally providing something vital for every single cell in your body. And so if that's you and you're struggling, it might not be you, right? So this part of the answer is not for you. But if you're struggling, you've got to look at it at a different way. You're not going to skip drinking out water. You're not going to skip out on drinking water. Maybe you don't drink enough water, but you're going to drink water throughout the day at some point or another because your body needs it. These thyroid meds, in a way, can become that for you where you need these hormones. It's the end product of what your thyroid is making. So the importance of taking it and taking it regularly I cannot stress that enough, right? So if you have skipped, like you forgot to take it, you are supposed to take it as soon as you remember, but you don't want to double up the dose. And so that works for T4 only medication and T4 and T3 medication, right? So for T4, T3 combination medication or just T3 medication, T3 is faster acting, right? The half-life is faster than T4. And unfortunately, with T3, you can take too much of it and feel it. It can create these hyper like symptoms within your body, increase anxiety, increase heart rate. It revs up your body. So remember, there isn't a cell in the body that's not affected by your thyroid hormones. And T3 allows your cells to do what they need to do. If their T3 is low, it's going to slow everything down. But if T3 is high, it's going to rev everything up. So to be on the safe side, it is recommended from pharmacists, endocrinologists, and even the producers of thyroid meds to just take it when you remember that you didn't take it, but you don't want to double the dose. And the same thing with T4. You want to do that same thing, okay? When you remember, take it, but don't double the dose. And so the interesting thing with T4 is it takes longer. That half-life is longer, but it takes longer to kind of get a baseline with T4. And the dosing that you're on right now, you might be trying out a new dose. You might be trying to figure out how much meds should be for you, or you might be on the right amount of meds that you need. Regardless, the amount that you must take every day is your baseline. That's what your doctor knows is going to help you and allow you to function well, especially if they have you in optimal levels. Meaning, if you're putting in double the dose every other day, once a week, you're not creating a safe baseline to know 6 weeks down the road if you are where you need to be. So the best thing you can do is take it when you remember, but you don't want to double the dose, even with T4, because you want to make sure that you have what you need every single day so you can have that foundational baseline 6 weeks, 8 weeks down the road. So that's really, really important to understand. And again, I, as a practitioner, I do not prescribe medication. So I'm not giving you this as a, substitute. I'm not giving this to you as a substitute to not talk to your doctor or your pharmacist, because I am not your doctor. I do not prescribe medication, but I have a lot of great relationship with different pharmacists and endocrinologists. And again, across the board, this is the recommendation. And also, I know this because I take thyroid meds and I have to take thyroid meds. So that's the answer to that question. But I always do want to add one more thing. And if you've been listening to my podcast episodes, I touch on this, is that depending on where you're at on your health journey, you want to be able to use this as the tool that it is. So, disclaimer, this isn't part of the question, right? But I'm going to throw this out here, right? How about utilizing it to help you get to a point where you feel better so that you can eventually come off of it as a possibility? Now, is that a possibility? Yes. I get asked this all the time. But you have to understand where you're at and what was causing your underlying thyroid issue, right? So if you've been on it long term, there's controversy there. The longer you're on it, is it possible to come off of it? Well, there's a lot of different factors there. Like, is your body dependent on it? Is there thyroid tissue that's been destroyed? Like if you've had chronic autoimmune issue, it gets a little bit more complex in the long term. But for more short-term use, one thing to understand is that if you are low on hormones, you're going to feel horrible, right? Again, there isn't a cell in the body that's not affected by that. And so it can be really hard to stay committed to making the lifestyle changes that you need to make. Because I'll give an example. I cannot tell you how many women have come to see me that have utilized fasting as an amazing tool to help their body heal, but they're not seeing the changes and they get really, really discouraged because they're like, oh my gosh, I've read this about fasting and I know this about autophagy, but I'm not seeing those changes. I'm like, well, yeah, your body's really, really stressed out because your hormones are so, so low. So thyroid hormones are meant to put in that end product, right? And if you're starting on having this underlying health issue, underlying autoimmunity, heck, if you need to be on it, be on it. It'll change your life and how you feel, but it won't change your life in the sense of it'll correct the underlying problem. It's not meant to correct anything. It's like get down to the cause of anything. It's meant to give you the hormones you need so you don't feel like crap, right? So something to take into consideration. Now, in the long term, thyroid med use, can you come off of it? Well, I don't like to put boundaries on what's possible for people's health. I have seen some really incredible stuff in my office that, and even virtually, that I would not have thought with my knowledge should happen, but it does happen. So is it possible? It could be. But again, it's all about what caused it and how are you helping your body to heal itself, right? So done with that question. So my TPO antibodies are 10. When is it considered to be Hashimoto's? This is a really good question. So depending on your lab levels, we use LabCorp and Quest, and usually they suggest keeping it under a 34. And I say just keep it as low as you can. But this is the interesting thing about thyroid antibodies, right? You can have thyroid antibodies there and not actually have this big, robust autoimmune response where you're seeing this kind of roller coaster of symptoms, right? You can see that increase and not have symptoms, or you can see an increase and do have symptoms, right? The biggest thing I would say is thyroid antibodies should be part of your yearly wellness workup for everyone, whether you have a thyroid issue or not. Your loved ones, everyone, like you should be keeping an eye on that because there's so many different things that can affect the thyroid and that can trigger a thyroid autoimmune storm, like within your body, and that can really affect your thyroid. So right now, I do think, okay, so you have a 10, that's fine. But if you start seeing that every year creeping higher and higher, then that's going to be a red flag for you. And especially if you're getting to that upper end of the range, really major red flag that there is a thyroid autoimmune issue that you're going to have to take care of, right? So that's what you want to look at. You want to make sure that you're keeping it below the range of what your lab ranges are. Now, my second question that I have here is I have Hashimoto's with my blood results showing TPO antibodies of 358 and thyroid globulin antibodies of 425. Do these levels indicate cancer? Okay. So, of course, I'm going to give this disclaimer. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you started. I don't know if they were higher and they've gone down or they were low and they went high. I don't know how long they've been like this. I will say that's a pretty robust number, especially for thyroid globulin antibodies because they're usually under a 1. I don't know if I've seen thyroid globulin antibodies in the 400, so that is very, very high. But now the question here is, do I have cancer? Now, let me go ahead and kind of talk about thyroid cancer. I have a whole episode I'm preparing to make on that. It's probably going to be a really long episode with studies so that people can really truly understand thyroid cancer, because more and more people are being diagnosed with thyroid cancer, are being told that they possibly have thyroid cancer. And when you hear the C word, holy crap, is it scary? And when you are scared and you're fearful, you're more in a sympathetic state. And when you're in a sympathetic state, you can't make a lot of rational decisions. So I want to create a resource so that people can understand it before it ever you have to hear about it in a doctor's office. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm pulling up some studies here that I had pulled up when I saw this question. Now, I don't know. I don't know if you have thyroid cancer. The only way to know is to, first look at ultrasound and then look at needle biopsy. And even with the fine needle biopsy, there's a lot of inconclusive results, right? On top of that, we know that the follicular variant encapsulated papillary carcinoma had its name changed to remove the word cancer from it, because when people would hear cancer, they would think, oh my gosh, I'm going to die, even though that form of thyroid cancer wasn't very aggressive at all. In fact, you would have more adverse reactions from the treatment than if you left the thyroid there itself. Now, again, I'm going to go into that further on the whole thyroid episode. But there's something that's really important to understand is that I'm going to go into my biggest frustration with how the medical system looks at thyroid autoimmunity. and then I'm going to share some studies about those frustrations, right? So my biggest frustration when it comes to how the medical system looks at thyroid antibodies is it looks at it as a thyroid problem, right? So you have thyroid autoimmune issues. And okay, so one of the first things that frustrates me is that, okay, so if you have thyroid antibodies, you have thyroid antibodies. Like, they're not going to go down. I'm saying this, that's what they tell you, either consciously or subconsciously at a doctor's office, right? Like, I see it over and over again where, like, if, someone requests, like someone that's coaching with me or in my membership group requests labs and it is positive, their doctors wouldn't test it again. I had someone that I coached years ago who was getting thyroid antibodies tested every single year because he asked for it. But every single year it was going up higher and higher. I mean, I think it was at 4,000 TPO antibodies, which is insane, right? So number one, the idea is that, okay, well, if you have thyroid antibody, you have thyroid antibodies. It is what it is. And the second frustrating thing I feel about that is that then it's treated as if it's only a thyroid issue. Like, it's just in your thyroid. And that's complete crap. Like, having a thyroid autoimmune issue is a systemic issue. It's a problem with your immune system. And we have studies that are showing more and more connections of thyroid autoimmunity leading to other autoimmunities, like with, blood sugar and diabetes and anemia and skin issues and celiac, because it's not like your thyroid is off by itself in the throat area, encapsulated, and the immune system only is going to attack that. If there's an imbalance within your immune system, there's an imbalance within your immune system everywhere. And so the next thing that frustrates me after all of that is that then, you probably have low thyroid hormones. And again, Graves, the autoimmune issue there as well. But with this question, it was like low thyroid, right? But what ends up happening then is you're like, wow, okay, so I have an autoimmune issue. That explains why I feel so bad. And then you get on thyroid medication, right? Because, okay, I'll tell you this. It's like 50-50. 50% of the people I've seen that have Hashimoto's don't even realize it's called Hashimoto's. Like, they don't even fully understand that, like, that they have an autoimmune issue that's causing their hypothyroidism. And then the other percentage do know that it's an autoimmune issue, but aren't giving any real guidance about if there's anything that can be done about it. Or they're not really taught what the thyroid medication is doing in regards to their thyroid autoimmunity. So what am I saying with that is that when you're at the doctor's office and you finally hear that you have this thyroid autoimmune issue and you're like, okay, oh my gosh, that's why I feel so bad. And that's probably why X, Y, and Z, that's why I haven't been able to lose weight. That's why I feel so emotionally unstable. I'm feeling more depressed or anxious. And then your doctor's like, okay, yeah, that's what you have. And then here gives you a script. And so you get on thyroid meds. And so what ends up happening is if you get on the right amount of thyroid meds, you feel better. So you're like, I'm getting this thyroid autoimmune issue taken care of now, because now you identified that there was a problem. You made that connection with your symptoms, and now you're starting to feel better. So in your mind, you're like, oh my gosh, I am good, right? Like, this is great. When in actuality, you're not good at all, because you still have a thyroid autoimmune issue. The problem is still there. And what ends up happening over time, and these conversations are always so difficult for me to have with the women that I work with, because they're like, what? They're just completely shocked. Over time, problems get worse, whether the autoimmune problem gets worse or they have another autoimmune issue. They all of a sudden have blood sugar imbalance issues, even though they eat clean or paleo or Whole30, right? I had that happen recently, not that long ago, a couple months ago, with someone who eats so incredibly well, but now they have this blood sugar issue and it's very shocking to them, right? Or they need more and more, like, they did a certain amount of medication early on and it helped them feel good, but now years down the road, it's no longer enough. They need more and more and more. So they're like, no, like, I took this amount and I've been on this amount for so many years. I don't understand why I feel like crap. Well, because you have a thyroid autoimmune issue. And now, especially you can see this through ultrasound, your thyroid got destroyed and you need to make up for that over time by needing to take more and more thyroid meds. That is always such a difficult conversation to have, that as long as that underlying problem persists. I've had women come in that have had this issue for 20 years. 20 years, and now their thyroid is really kind of shutting down. And they're like, but no, but Synthroid, this amount of Synthroid worked for me then. And I'm like, but your body is different now, especially your thyroid. And so that's the really frustrating thing, is that this should be treated as a whole body issue and not just with a thyroid. And you should understand that if the body continues to attack the thyroid, that thyroid cells can die, that thyroid tissue can be destroyed. And as long as that persists there, then there's a problem, even if you feel good. Oh, that's always a hard one too. Even if you feel good. I came across an article, and I hope I saved it, but I was just like, yeah, of course. And the article was talking about, it was like in a science, I don't know if it was Scientific American, it was like in a science magazine. And they were talking about how more and more people are being diagnosed with thyroid cancer without having any symptoms. Without having any symptoms, because the body is working overtime. There's all these underlying imbalances and dysfunctions that are not being addressed. And I also believe that a lot of you guys are having symptoms, but it's kind of like a bad fart. Okay? It's like when you walk into a room and someone passes gas, you smell it, but the longer you're there, you don't even recognize it. So for a lot of you guys, you have learned to live with a body that's not well, and you've learned to adapt. And especially the women that I work with, what I find is that they will associate what they can accomplish in a day with how well they are, right? Like I had someone that would wake up at 5 a.m. to do a workout. And you know what? That is pretty freaking amazing. Every day, 5 a.m., business owner, opening up multiple clinics and waking up at 5 a.m. And she was like, no, there's no way I have adrenal issues. And then I find out that like she would wake up in the middle of the night in a panic, or she'd have a lot of anxiety at night. So yeah, she can wake up at 5 a.m., but how she felt the other, especially in the evening, was a big red flag that she thought was just normal because life is stressful, right? So that's the thing. Like when I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, I didn't think I had symptoms. I sat there completely shocked to hear I had it, even though my cancer has been reclassified to not be called cancer. But that being said, you have to take into consideration that if you have thyroid antibodies, you have to do something to change your immune system, right? You have to do something about that. And I want to explain a little bit more about what thyroid autoimmunity is and kind of like where the imbalance is there, just to kind of give you kind of more of a basic understanding that you probably didn't get from your doctor's office. And if you did, holy moly, that doctor really cares. But, or, maybe they just have more time. I don't know. But because the next question, I want to share this because the next question is, I have high TSH and have high antibodies. Where do I start? I don't know where to begin. So I'm going to explain a little bit about the immune imbalance when it comes to thyroid autoimmunity and where I would start. Okay. So the first thing to understand is that within your immune system, you have these things called helper cells, Th1, Th2 helper cells. And the purpose of these helper cells is to take on foreign invaders, right? We've been bombarded by bacteria and viruses and pathogens of things like on a daily basis. And the goal is never to avoid these things. The goal isn't to just never encounter a virus. That's not going to be possible. To never encounter a bacteria. Like these things make us stronger. They prime our immune system, right? But there's other triggers And I'll share some of those that can make that immune system become imbalanced. Now, the first thing I want to say is that I don't hear it as much anymore, but there's this common idea that having an autoimmunity means that your body's making a mistake and it's attacking itself. And that's not at all how I educate people on this, right? Your body never makes a mistake. Your body is intelligent and every day wants to keep itself alive. If our body was dumb enough to kill itself, we wouldn't be alive as a human species, just plain and simple, right? Our innate intelligence is too intelligent for that, right? Every single day, you're fighting off cancer cells. Every single day, your heart is pumping, your lungs are breathing. You're listening to this right now without even like having to think about it, right? That is how powerful your body is. But the more we continue to live in this modern world, the more and more we're exposed to things that we never should have been exposed to, chemicals and toxins, procedures like dental procedures, stressors like chronically being inside, bombarded by artificial light. These are stressors that are not normal to our way of living and our body has to adapt to. And so the one way I explain looking at, this autoimmune response, this immune response is, if I take my 6-year-old son and I let him watch TV from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., right? And then I turn it off and he's going to do what? He is going to have this hyper reaction, right? And I shared in the episode before this one about what to do when you're sick, Sir Mel Greaves and his work with leukemia and how he is seeing that our inability to adapt to stressors is a big reason for why we're developing cancer. It's our body's inability to encounter pathogens and have an appropriate response because we live in such a sterile environment. And so the immune system was kind of put in a place where it's bombarded by these triggers and that should never be there, and it's going to have a reaction. Like, I wouldn't look at my son and be like, oh, there's something seriously wrong with him. I'd look at him and be like, oh my goodness, he's been bombarded with overstimulation all day long. No wonder he's having a meltdown and screaming and yelling and freaking out and throwing a temper tantrum, right? Our immune system, I mean, that's a very simple way, like very, very simple, because the immune system is just more complex than that. But I want that to come through because I never want you to think that your body's this broken down machine incapable of healing, of feeling better, getting better. And I think over and over again, we get this messaging subconsciously from a lot of different areas from the time we are born. Even the birthing process is this disease process now in our modern world where we need all this outside help. Listen, if you want that outside help, that's a whole nother conversation. But in the end, your body is an incredible creation that was created to heal itself. But going back to this whole immune system thing, right? So there's Th1, there's Th2 cells, and it's the imbalance between Th1 and Th2 where we see an autoimmune issue occur. And I will say there's a study, and I'll add it here, and there's a few other studies that have shared this, that there tends to be an increase of more of a Th1 dominant immune imbalance. So you can be dominant Th1 or Th2, but there's a lot more people that are dominant in Th1 when it comes to Hashimoto's. And in this study, I'll share in the notes, it talks about how the dominance of that Th1, like that imbalance of Th1 and Th2, correlates with the severity of the Hashimoto's or the autoimmunity that someone experiences. So that's really important to understand. So what is Th1? So Th1 is that kind of first line of defense. They're responsible for killing these invaders, these outside things, right? They're these natural killer cells, these cytotoxic T cells. That's their job. But then you have Th2. So Th2 are B cells. These are the ones that are in charge of identifying the bad guys that we encounter. So Th1, Th2 are essential for us to survive. But it's when there's an imbalance between Th1, our natural killer cells, our cytotoxic T cells, and Th2 or B cells where we see an autoimmune disorder. Now, I want to kind of point something out is that there's another component called cytokines. And you may have heard about cytokines because there's a lot of conversation about cytokines with COVID and COVID vaccination and the possibility that having the virus or having the vaccination can create a cytokine storm. Now, cytokines are messengers. They pretty much make things happen. They communicate what needs to happen uh, when we have a foreign invader or when the body needs to kind of go into action. So look at these helper cells as kind of the army that's like, all right, this is coming in. They're identifying there's a problem. They're getting the immune system to go after this enemy, and they do all that communication through cytokines. And I say that though because cytokines in the thyroid, I think we're going to see more and more of this conversation, at least in studies and in science and research, because an increase of cytokines, we're seeing there be a connection with autoimmune issues, especially things like Graves, which is hyperthyroidism. So your thyroid, so these messengers are intimately related with these helper cells. So your thyroid can produce this. These inflammatory cells can produce this, especially the lymphocytes. And the presence of these cytokines can now stimulate more T cells and B cells, which contributes to more problematic issues with autoimmunity. Not only that, they affect the receptors on the thyroid, and that means your ability to bind up hormones. What does that mean is that going back to kind of what I said earlier about sometimes thyroid medication over time needs to be increased. There's people that'll get on higher amounts of thyroid meds and they feel better, but the doctor's really shocked because they're on high amounts and wants to get them back down. So they'll cut back their dosage. And then this person's like, well, now all my symptoms came back, but the doctor likes better how it looks on paper. Well, when situations like that happen, we're not taking into consideration cell receptor sensitivity, our ability to bind up and utilize those hormones. So this was a quick little breakdown of thyroid autoimmunity. Again, this is just trying to get you to understand there's a bigger picture here. There's a Th1, Th2, there's cytokines there, there's thyroid receptor sensitivity, there's thyroid tissue death, right? Destruction that can happen from thyroid autoimmunity. I think that's the biggest thing I want you to gather from this is that it's so much more than just my thyroid isn't making hormones, right? It's so much more than that. So, after all of that, where do you start? Okay, so I just want to paint you a picture, right? I have to make sure that your mindset around this thyroid autoimmunity changes, right? This isn't an easy fix. I think that is just one of the biggest lies we've been told in medicine when it comes to thyroid. It's such an easy fix. Like, there's no reason to question how things are happening, especially when it comes to the thyroid and inside of endocrinology. Why try to fix something that works? And this isn't something I believe, right? I want you to understand it. If they have a way to get you not having symptoms, why change it? I mean, granted, we're not looking at quality of life. We're not talking about medication side effects. We're not talking about long-term being a long-term pharmaceutical patient, right? We're just saying if we can get rid of these symptoms, why change that? Well, personally, because I want to be as well as I can be. We know that if we keep living the same way as everyone else, we're going to end up like everyone else. And true healing means not just getting rid of symptoms, but living in a place of prevention, of optimizing your health as much as possible so that you're better with age, right? So, we kind of are sold on this idea. I was sold on this idea at 19 that if I cut out my thyroid, everything was taken care of. And that's not true. I was very, very toxic. I was very, very toxic. Lead, mercury, very toxic, affecting brain function and all these other things, right? Um, if you have thyroid autoimmunity, like I mentioned, just feeling better doesn't mean you are better. And then it's always a very frustrating journey to why am I having all these other health issues, even if you're eating well and exercising, right? So, how I wish we could reframe the conversation when it comes to your thyroid is that it's a process, and each layer you go deeper. And I'll go ahead and tell you this: everyone has to eventually detox. Everyone has to detox, and everyone has to detox the right way. I'm not talking about just drinking some spirulina. I'm not talking about doing some liver, wait, what is it? Celery juice. Like, I'm talking about real pulling toxins out of the tissue, moving your lymph, sweating, utilizing things like castor oil packs and infrared sauna to really remove toxins. But really detoxing is removing toxins that your body is holding on to at a tissue level. And that takes more work than just, taking an herb, right? But this is what I want to say. There's so many more steps before you can jump into detoxing. And how I would start this, and this might seem like like I don't know, like you're like, oh my gosh, like there's so many areas to hit. But again, the goal is you do what you can now, you get better, you can take a break, because even actively doing something, your body's going to heal. Not actively doing something, just taking care of yourself, your body's going to heal. That's the good news. You don't have to be intense every season of your life, but I do believe that you need to have a roadmap of each layer that you have to address as you move forward, right? And I always think, and I see it, and it's remarkable that detoxing has to be a part. We are bombarded by chemicals that destroy our thyroid. I'll never forget, my brother sent me an article of this one chemical they identified that is just horrible for the thyroid. And I'm just like, of course, there's going to be so many. They're going to identify more and more. And that the idea isn't, there's a lot of conversation about toxins like, oh, it's only a little bit, but it's a little bit every single day. Or it's a little bit on top of all the other things that our body is bombarded with in toxins. It's your toxicity threshold. It's not your one-time exposure or your little bit of exposure. Is that exposure in light of everything else your body has gone through your whole life, especially with a lot of these toxins having half-lives that outlive you, right? Like, these toxins don't leave. We have forever chemicals because you will die before that toxin leaves your body. So I got onto the deep end. I started with the deep end, but let's go ahead and start from the beginning. Like, where would I start? The first place you want to start at is look at inflammatory foods, look at any food sensitivities, and then look at the gut. That's the first place, right? That's where I would make sure, well, let me take a step back because if you haven't listened, I think the second or third episode, I talk about optimal thyroid labs. You need to go listen to that one, because let me go ahead and take a step back. Make sure that your thyroid hormones are optimal before you start going into like deeper things, right? If you need to support it with, you can do over-the-counter glandulars, grass-fed, cow thyroid. If you need a little bit of support, if you're on meds, make sure that you're on an optimal amount of meds for you, and then go into kind of healing, right? And so that first stage that I talked about is, okay, is there any food sensitivities that are making your body inflamed, that you are having symptoms because of underlying gut issues? We know there's a lot of these different connections with the gut, with thyroid function, thyroid nodule growth, nutrient status, and all of that. So starting off with changing how you're eating, and I'm going to do a whole probably a whole month of nutrition podcast episodes. So make sure you're listening to that, but you got to clean up the way you're eating. You got to change your fat, and you got to make sure your blood sugar is balanced, right? Good quality fat, getting rid of rancid fats like canola oil and margarine, and going to more natural sources, animal sources, and more natural sources of good quality fat, making sure that your blood sugar is balanced, getting the right labs. Go to my website, Dr. Rebecca Warren, Optimal Thyroid Lab ebook. On there, it's going to explain what thyroid labs you should get, but it's also going to explain all the labs you should get. You should be testing your blood sugar, which is more than just A1C or CBC. You got to look at triglycerides, you got to look at fasting insulin, and start with nutrition. Listen to what I said. Start with nutrition. That's where you start. You can start to feel better, but I can bet you that that's not going to be the thing that's going to cause a lasting change. It's a necessity to eat well and to nourish your body, but that for 99% of the people isn't going to be the thing that's just going to change everything when it comes to autoimmunity. So starting off there, then looking at any kind of food sensitivities, we know gluten is a very common one. Cow's milk dairy can be a very common one, but it can go a step further. There can be almonds or eggs. There's a whole way of eating called autoimmune paleo that goes after a lot of common things that food sensitivities can really cause some issues and some flare ups for people that have autoimmunity. You can look into that. If not, just do an elimination diet where you're eliminating the top ones and then you can reintroduce them according to how you feel. And then you go into your gut. Now, I want to say this, like, you're probably like, okay, you might be taking notes or you might be listening to this. Guys, I have a Thyroid Inner Circle. It's a membership group that if this is you and you're listening to this and you're like, man, I want to start that process. This is why I have the membership group, because I wanted to create something where people can be a part of long term, where we walk together in the healing process, where we can focus on one thing, get better, and then go on to the next thing, right? My Thyroid Inner Circle membership is pretty much teaching you how to do each one of these levels, each one of these areas that you might need to focus on and to walk alongside you. So it's really cool because I teach more intimate setting, more detailed, like, hey, take this or try this supplement or do this. With it's for women. Sorry guys, if you're listening to this, but so the women in the group kind of walk alongside. I'll teach according to whatever the group needs as a whole. And then I do a thyroid Q&A. And the thyroid Q&A, well, actually, let me clear that up. I don't just do a thyroid Q&A. I just do a Q&A. And it's been so much fun because that's when everyone gets to send me questions and we get to share studies and protocols and clinical things that can help everyone wherever they at. And it's an incredible community to be a part of. And we're developing more and more stuff for that membership. So if you're at that point where you're like, okay, I want to, get better with this, please check out thyroidinnercircle.com. So you can get there by going to thyroidinnercircle.com or drrebeccawarren.com. I highly recommend it because it's a process and you shouldn't go at it alone. Again, I do this podcast, I do videos, I do content according to all the things I wish I knew 17, 10, 5 years ago. That's all I want to do is give you as much information, as much that you can use to feel like you are the best advocate for yourself. So thyroidinnercircle.com or drrebeccawarren.com. You can find out more about it there. So going back to the gut. Now, the thing is with the gut, we know if there's gut permeability, it's going to increase, chances of autoimmune issues. And there is non-celiac gluten sensitivity that can make that worse. If you have high zonulin, which is the protein that causes gut permeability, that's going to be a problem. You can start just kind of an overall deeper gut protocol, or you can actually get yourself tested. And I'll put a link. I love the GI map test. A lot of incredible information. I'll put that in the notes. So that's where I start, right? Get that under control because a lot of symptoms can be managed through nutrition and gut. And honestly, the gut pathogens, the gut infections, if you have parasites or blasto, like H. pylori, that could be your trigger. That could be why you're having all this autoimmune issue. But if it's not that, after you've done that work, then you have to go deeper. And at that point is when we try to identify, okay, have you had mold exposure? Have you been exposed to Lyme? Have you had root canals, dental procedures? Do you have mercury in your mouth, amalgam fillings? We just go deeper. Do you have Epstein-Barr? Have you had mono in the past? Is that reactivated? At that point is when you can really go deeper and start addressing maybe these deeper triggers that you may have been exposed to in the past. Now, let me tell you why I do it the way I do it. Because if you decide to go after Lyme and go and detox and get rid of heavy metals and do all this stuff, and your clearance pathways are not open, ooh, that's going to suck for you. I'm going to be real with you. If you're not having normal, regular bowel movements, if you're not sweating, if you're not menstruating, if your lymphatic system is not moving, if your liver is not clearing out efficiently, which can all be affected by low thyroid, by the way, you're going to be trying to get rid of stuff and not eliminating it. And if you cannot eliminate it, it just kind of redistributes inside of your body. And so looking at those things, there's also things that you can do to kind of support your immune system balance, support Th1 over Th2, and examples like different herbs like echinacea and vitamin D. That's one that's really studied. Like if you don't know your vitamin D status, we know there's a connection there and a relationship there between vitamin D and these helper cells. And then eventually you detox. You just detox as a normal part of your life, on and off throughout your life, because we're always going to be bombarded by things. And then I will say in there at some point along that line, looking at your adrenals would be really important. Doing like a cortisol awakening response test, which is a saliva 24-hour test, the most accurate way to test your cortisol response and see if your adrenals need support. So I should have added that at the beginning. I mentioned with your nutrition blood sugar balance, that first stage, if there's some type of blood sugar imbalance or if there's some type of HPA, which is hypothalamus pituitary adrenal dysfunction, it will be hard for you to make changes that last. Your body in those two situations is just in survival mode, and survival will always take precedence over healing. Sympathetic over parasympathetic. The goals are different. There's a hierarchy of needs. And so, of course, adrenal cortisol testing, addressing that at the beginning along with blood sugar imbalances. So I just realized now, because I went to go look at my notes, I did forget to touch on one thing going back to this Hashimoto's. Do these levels indicate cancer? The antibodies themselves do not indicate cancer. But going back to what I was talking about earlier on, we have looked at in studies and research this connection between having Hashimoto's and your increased chances of being diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And so I'm going to put these studies linked in the notes as well. This one is Association of Hashimoto's of Thyroiditis and Thyroid Cancer. And it's looking at lymphocytic infiltration of Hashimoto's is frequently encountered in thyroid glands when they are resected for cancer. And so, you know, what they found in this study is that lymphocytic infiltration of Hashimoto's may indeed be a risk factor for developing the type of cancer, which is papillary thyroid carcinoma. A pathogenesis linking these diseases still remains unclear, but the relationship between thyroid lymphoma and Hashimoto's appears to be well established. So that's one. In the Journal of Frontiers in Oncology, we have from 2017 association between Hashimoto's thyroiditis and thyroid cancer in 64,628 patients. So in this study, they identified 36 studies that were published between 1955 and 2016, and they found an association between Hashimoto thyroiditis and papillary thyroid carcinoma, and between Hashimoto thyroiditis and thyroid lymphoma. But surprisingly, they didn't find any with the other types of thyroid cancer, which is follicular, medullary, or anaplastic thyroid cancer. So really interesting, explanation or touch on that. The next study is the impact of Hashimoto thyroiditis on thyroid cancer nodules, cytology, and risk of thyroid cancer. And this one was looking at a total of 2,651 patients were diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and 3,895 had Hashimoto thyroiditis nodules, and 10,168 non-Hashimoto's thyroid nodules were biopsied. And the conclusion was that Hashimoto thyroiditis increases the risk of thyroid malignancy in any patient presenting for nodule evaluation. Diffuse sonographic heterogeneity and or thyroid globulin positivity should be used for risk assessment at time of evaluation. So interesting there in that study, it's looking at TPO antibodies as a risk factor. So, not necessarily saying, hey, because you have thyroid antibodies, you're going to have thyroid cancer, but that it's a risk factor for thyroid cancer. And thyroid cancer, again, is a whole conversation that I am preparing all the studies, all this information, just so that everyone can hear another side that isn't really talked about very much, but it's increasing every year, whether it's because we're doing way too much imaging or because people just are growing more nodules than ever before. It is increasing. So it's a conversation that should be had and that you should be aware of. So just start. You've just got to be able to start in your healing journey. And I think the first part is understanding where you're at, what you have going on, and understand that it's much, much deeper. And the goal isn't to go out and do everything all at once, but I think that alone, understanding what it really is and what it's not, and what it means to heal versus, not really healing, is the first step of the healing process. And you're not going to be perfect at everything at the beginning, but you'll get better over time as long as you're committed to it, as long as you're connected to that. So that's everything for today's thyroid Q&A for those with a thyroid. I will see you guys next time. All right, guys, thanks for tuning into today's episode. I'm going to take a few seconds here and answer some frequently asked questions I get asked when people find my podcast or if they find me on social media. And it might be a question that you have as well. But before I jump into that, I'm going to ask a favor. If you enjoyed today's episode, or if this podcast has been helpful to you, I'm going to ask that you leave a review. I love being able to see how this is helping you on your health journey. And by leaving a review, you help me be able to reach more people with this message. Subscribe. You also have the chance to have these episodes automatically downloaded so you don't miss any future episodes that go live. All right, let's jump into these questions. The first question I always get asked is, Dr. Rebecca, how do I work with you? Well, I'm excited to tell you guys about my amazing program. It's the Thyroid Inner Circle membership. I love this program. I love this membership. It was a dream I had for so long about creating a space in a community where women can come together and learn how to take their health back into their own hands, how to heal themselves, not just the thyroid. We go over hormones and adrenals and gut health and detox. And every single month, there's 2 different sessions. One session is focused on me teaching you about whatever the group is focused on doing health-wise. And then we do a Q&A session, whether that's about the topic or about anything at all, like how do I read my labs? But to find out more information about that membership group, go to thyroidinnercircle.com. And there you can find out how to sign up for it, what it looks like to be a part of that amazing program. The second thing I get asked is, where do I start? Now, where you start is, have you done a complete wellness panel? If you go to my website, drrebeccawarren.com, you'll see a free Optimal Thyroid Lab ebook. What you'll notice is in that ebook, I don't describe just what thyroid labs to get done. I go over a full wellness panel that I do on myself, that I've done on women I work with throughout the years. It's so important to get your labs done, the right labs, and understand what's going on there. That's the first place to start. And the last question I want to touch on, it's usually from people that are living without a thyroid and just want more information on what that's like. Now, if you go to Facebook, I do have a free group there on Facebook. It's Healing After Thyroidectomy, where people are either going through that, living without it, and it's a great community where I pop in. So that's the Healing After Thyroidectomy group on Facebook. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.